The stream is going now, so. Uh,
Anyway, let's go.
all right, so the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I am Mike Patine.
and we are continuing our 2022 Oscar marathon by trying to watch Oscar nominated movies and then talking about them.
Yes. And you look like you are making very good progress.
I've managed to watch a bunch in the last couple of weeks. I've been focusing primarily on the Best Picture nominees, as opposed to, the other smaller ones. But as a result, I have now seen all of the Best Picture nominees.
That will not happen to me, but I will make, because I have what, 2 weeks left?
I believe that's
Oh,
correct.
okay, 2 weeks
I
left.
want to say that it's the 27th is the awards, so that's 2 weeks.
It should be 2 weeks from tonight, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep. So yes, I had to take a little bit of a hiatus. I had to go to Las Vegas for work, and that's not exactly a conducive environment to watching Oscar movies
Hmm.
um, for the week. But I have seen some more things, and we have other things to discuss. And I'll be curious. I, like honestly, like I don't want you to go into detail in all the best pictures, obviously, because we haven't both seen them.
Right.
But if I was to focus on, I think I have one, two, three, four, five, six left. If I was to focus on three to five,
Hmm.
I would be interested in your recommendation, and maybe the people watching and listening would too, if they're not going to see all of them,
Sure.
of
Sure.
what to prioritize, even outside of like what will get me the most,
Well, if nothing
points,
else,
right?
I what I can do is give kind of a capsule review and a description of what kind of movie it is, because it can also be a matter of, there might be a couple of different reasons for priority. The first one, of course, I would imagine for anyone ought to be, do you think you'll like it, right? But also just to, if you want to be part of the whole buzz and conversation about, like, making a prediction over who might win and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be great to hear, what like the story, like what kind of people would like it,
Mm-hmm.
whether you think it's going to be a contender that we should be worthy of our time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to focus on those things rather than this has X number of nominations, because like I can see that. I know what will give me the most points, but I'm not going to get to 100.
Right.
So if I'm going to focus on seeing a couple of movies that are maybe outside of what I would normally watch,
Mm-hmm.
that would help me and hopefully help somebody else watching too. So
Absolutely. So, I guess with that covered, I'll just go ahead and do the quick rundown of the ones that I've seen since we last talked about it. First up, right there at the top of the list is Belfast, which I really knew nothing about other than Kenneth Branagh directed it, and I knew that because he's nominated for Best Director, as well as it getting Best Picture, or nominated for Best Picture. And I vaguely understood it to have something to do with Ireland, um, from the name. But it turns out that it's a pretty sweet movie. It certainly takes place during the time period known as the Troubles, in Northern Ireland, where there was a lot of conflict and political violence between. I guess I makes call it political violence. I guess even though the conflict is primarily between Protestants and Catholics there in Northern Ireland, but what the movie is really about, other than taking place in that time period and that place, is a little kid who's growing up there. And it's kind of about the strange, surreal blend of having to deal with that conflict in the background of also just being a kid and wanting to do kid things and going to school and stuff like that. And having there be a lot of tension and conflict without society entirely crumbling and having to flee, is kind of that balance that is being played with there. But there also being the question of, like, well, what would it mean to maybe move? Because you've got your roots there, you've got a lot of family there, but it's also dangerous. Is this the place to bring up kids, right? And so ultimately, it's kind of a sweet family movie set in this location and time period. It has certainly elements that acknowledge the violence and conflict of the time period, but it's not as heavy or dark as people might expect from the setting. Because it's, like I said, it's primarily told from the perspective of this kid who's probably like 8 or something like that, maybe a little older. No, maybe he's like 10, something like that. But yeah, so that's Belfast. We already talked about Coda a little bit, but I think having now seen all the Best Picture nominees, I think Coda is still my personal favorite. Like, that's the one that I think is the one that I liked the most personally, which is not necessarily the same thing as thinking that it will win. It might, but the next movie on the list. So if people don't remember, CODA stands for Child of Deaf Adults. It's about a girl who finds her devotion to her family as she is the only hearing member of her family. Her devotion to her family puts her in conflict with her newly found enjoyment of singing, and that's what it's about. So the next movie on the list is Drive My Car, which is a Japanese language film, although it actually has a fair amount of spoken English and spoken Korean and some spoken Korean sign language in it. I say spoken, signed, I guess, just due to some of of what it's about. But the primary story is that we have a man who's an actor and a theater director who has a lot of trouble expressing his feelings, which is kind of an interesting flip side of the coin with the fact that he's an actor, right? Because he is all about when he performs and when he gets into theater, like, it's all about this expression of emotion, but he has trouble doing that in his ordinary life. And the title comes from the fact that he gets hired to be a resident director for a production of a play that he's kind of famous for doing the lead in, but he won't star in this one, he'll just direct. But part of the rules of this like little organization doing this play is that everyone who's there as a resident has to be driven by a local driver. And that's a problem for him initially because he finds a lot of comfort in driving his own car and going over his lines in the car and the privacy and kind of being enclosed with himself in solitude, in solitary in his car. And so now the idea that, oh, here's this young woman who's going to do all your driving is something that he's initially uncomfortable with, but they develop a rapport, and that's what the movie's about. It is a pretty, when I say slow, I don't mean it in the pejorative sense. I just mean it's not like a thriller or anything. It's just a human drama. It is a little slow, but I think well told. I think it's very good. I did laugh out loud though when 40 minutes in the opening credits roll. In context, it actually makes sense why that's where they do it, but it's still funny. But yeah, I think it's really good, and I hope people check it out, even though it's got a couple of hurdles: A, being long, B, being in Japanese, but it's very good. Next is King Richard, which is a movie about the father of Venus and Serena Williams and his methods and his journey to try to help Venus and Serena become the champion tennis players that we all know they grew up to be. Stars Will Smith as Richard Williams, the King Richard of the title. I actually, other than the fact that I had heard of Venus and Serena Williams and knew that they were incredible tennis players, like, best in the world sort of thing, right? Like, I mean, I knew that part, but I really didn't know anything about the rest of the story, and so a lot of it the plot was new to me. And I think that it became my prediction for winner because it's just good in all the normal, ordinary, straight down the middle ways, right? I don't want that to in any way sound like a bad thing because it's not. It's more just a matter of it's not experimental. It's just doing it right, fastball right down the middle. And it does that well. It's a pretty standard story in terms of having a lot of the sports tropes in there, but it's got a great cast. It's well produced and well put together. It's yeah. So there's nothing that unique or unusual about it, other than it just being a good one of those movies. In terms of the tension is, well, we know we're good, but can we win the big game? Well, we're sure going to work hard and try, and I don't want to be dismissive when I say that, because those are classic tropes that work for many, many movies that are all great. So it's very good, but I think it just becomes kind of like it's easy to vote for that one, whereas almost all of the others feel like they have something about them that makes it a little bit more complicated, enough so that I feel like this one will win, is my guess.
So I'll echo that that's good to hear, because I'm definitely going to watch this one. In fact, I almost did watch this one. We were debating on a movie to watch before I went to Vegas, and it was like, do we want to jump into that? And it was long, or do we want something fun? And The King's Man had just come out. We elected that because we were such big fans of the earlier Kingsman films.
Mm-hmm.
This one is not that good.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is a shame. It's very, and so instead of watching this and being able to contribute and discuss with you, I fell asleep an hour into the movie and never felt like watching the rest of it again, because it didn't have the same vibe. But either way, that's an aside. I'm excited that this is good. I know not only, all the things, I'm sure it covers a lot of, not only is it just trying to win the big game and the pressure, but they had a unique pressure in that they were Black tennis players, right? And, and that this was something, they are something special, not just in their ability, but in their breaking of norms. And so I'm excited to see, and it's famous in the sports world about the pressure their father put on them to make this happen, and whether that was okay or not okay. And I don't know how this movie deals with that, but I'm interested.
Yeah. So just to elaborate on that part of it a little bit, what's interesting is that Will Smith is playing a character, right, that is based on the real man. And Venus and Serena, and I believe their sister, I want to say Tina, were all executive producers. Okay. So they're signed off on this version of the movie, right? So, awesome. Yeah. So what's interesting about Richard Williams, as portrayed in this movie, at least, because that's what I have seen, is that he is so determined that he knows exactly the right thing and exactly what to do. That yes, he puts a lot of pressure on them and makes them work really, really hard. But at least as portrayed in the movie, they seem up for it, right? Like they're not complaining about that. And in fact, where things start to have a little bit more tension is where he insists that they should not play in juniors tennis matches prior to going pro. Because apparently that's the way it's done for every other professional tennis player, is they come up going through juniors tennis. And he decides that's too much pressure. I don't like the way the parents act in that environment. I want them to be able to be kids sometimes. I'm going to insist that the tennis coaches keep working with them every day, but they're not going to play the matches. And that's where there starts to be a lot of questions, because basically he is completely going against all of the conventional wisdom about how to do this. It's not what the kids want. It's not what the coaches want, but he is determined that is the absolute only way to go. And it becomes a question of like, it's, you know, because we know how it turns out, right? The movie doesn't even really treat Venus and Serena as being great, as anything but inevitable, except in the context of it's inevitable if their dad doesn't screw it up for them. You know, it's clear he gave them a lot of support and encouragement and training and pressure to get them there, but also he's the one that's taking big wild swings with their career against all of the conventional wisdom. And it's not always clear that he was making the right decisions.
Right. So I wonder if Venus and Serena are obviously executive producers on this, if it's a little bit of a set the record straight and not whitewash their father's image, but make sure that people understand that like this whole debate that exists in the sports world about whether he did or didn't overpressure them is to tell the true story of, yes, he pressured us, but that's why we're great, right? When you do it correctly.
Well,
maybe there's some of that. I don't know, and I
yeah,
haven't seen it.
I think that it does. So being not especially familiar with all of that controversy necessarily, I know what was shown in the movie. It does certainly engage with that discussion. But it does make it clear that there is some question, even as presented in the film, of it not just being as simple as, well, they turned out great, so what he did must have been correct.
Right. It doesn't leave it as an ends justify the means. It's
right.
There's a little complex soup to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where at the same time that it's hard to argue with results, it's also true that there are lots of other people also contributing to the whole thing, including, of course, Venus and Serena themselves. So it's not all him, right?
That makes me, I'm honestly, after this conversation, I was going to watch this. I'm even more excited. And again, without having seen it, if I take your word that it's as well made as it is, it definitely sets it up for a favorite because it touches something. It hits the movie crowd, right? And it's a well-made story about real people. And it also hits this whole other thing that exists that again, you just even said you weren't even aware of. But this has been like a thing with the two of them since they came up. And it was always brought up when it's which one is better and all this and how does he feel about it, blah, blah, blah. And obviously, clearly, Serena is like turned out to be the best one. I mean,
well,
bad, but,
it's interesting actually because most of the movie's plot, like the period of time being shown in the movie, is
Venus would have been
the period up to Venus going pro and her first professional match. So like Serena is not pro at that point, although she's obviously also in training, and they do talk about that. But yeah, the time period being shown in the movie is the time period leading up to Venus going pro as the older sister.
Who was sort of the not heir because it wasn't like his thing, but like she was the favorite for a very long time. And then Serena just came through and just bulldozed all that down, and I don't remember their record against each other, but it's not good for Venus.
Well, the title cards at the end do convey that Serena's records surpass Venus's, and it shows some clips of them having competed against each other. But it certainly, as you might imagine, with the two of them as executive producers, doesn't portray it in exactly the same words that you just used. It's more kind of like Venus was amazing and Serena was even better, as opposed to anything else,
Just is a fair description of what happened. Like Venus was very, very good, but every time once Serena came through the ranks and they started playing each other in finals, like and then after Venus, like her career ended and Serena's kept going, like it's just she has dwarfed what Venus did. But Venus was first, it was that. But anyway.
Yeah. So in any case, I think it's very good, and I will also just hand it to the star power of Will Smith. That it's not that I thought this movie was going to be bad or anything like that, but it wasn't necessarily one that I was really pumped to see. But I put it on, and there's Will Smith, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I like Will Smith. I'll watch Will Smith. It's just like, oh, yeah, that helps a lot in a movie.
Yeah, star power matters. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it sure
so
does.
yeah, hopefully I'll plan to see this before we talk again, and then we can dive into it a little in more depth. So
Yeah. All right. So next on the list here is Licorice Pizza, and I'm going to go ahead and briefly comment on the title because I didn't know this going in, but wish I had, which is that the title really doesn't have anything to do with the story. There's not a meaning to it, like within the plot. Licorice Pizza was the name of a Southern California record store during the 70s and 80s. And so, like, vinyl records, Licorice Pizza, right? It's shaped like a pizza. It's made of... That's what the title comes from. It really has nothing to do with the story except that it takes place in that.
I get it. They're like vinyl records are licorice pizza because they look like licorice in the shape. Gotcha.
Exactly. And so that's what the title means. It's not something
from record store name.
Yeah, yeah. And but the thing is that I didn't know that, and so I did kind of watch a lot of the movie kind of waiting to find out what the title meant, and then the credits rolling and me going, but what does the title mean? And then I looked it up and was like, oh, I wish I had done that beforehand. And then so that's why I've now shared that non-spoiler that the that the title doesn't mean anything from the story, and you don't have to. It's not a plot spoiler at all.
Well, you spoiled all of our anticipation of trying to figure out what it meant.
But see, that's my whole point, is that the anticipation is wasted because the movie doesn't tell you that.
Unless that's part of the viewing of the movie.
In any case, what Licorice Pizza is about is it takes place in 1973 in Southern California. And we have Gary Valentine, played by Cooper Hoffman, who is the son of Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of my favorite actors that obviously died far too young. So it's kind of fun to see his son now, becoming an actor and working with Paul Thomas Anderson as Philip Seymour Hoffman often did. Hopefully his story is a happier ending. But in any case... and so he is playing a 15-year-old who is extremely precocious, not in like a book smarts way, although he does fine in school, but in just sort of being a charmer, hustler, sort of like he's always got a scheme going. He's really good at talking to people and all of that sort of thing, right? Like he is extremely advanced when it comes to those personal social skills. And we also have Alana, played by Alana Haim, who is 25 and meets him because she is working for the company that's there to take class pictures at his high school. And the thing is that he is immediately smitten by her. And she is immediately telling him, what are you talking about? You're 15 years old. But the thing is, he is so charming that she can't help but kind of want to be around him and get swept up in his energy anyway. And it's really about the two of them kind of orbiting each other, and what they've each got going on in this time period. The plot is like a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson movies, in that it kind of is not always obvious through the runtime where it's going. Like, what is this about? It seems like it's kind of just about these characters just doing stuff. And it kind of does eventually come in for a landing, but there's long periods of time where you sort of just feel like, okay, this is the next thing that's happening, I guess. All right. And so, I mean, I really like it. I don't want to make it sound like I don't. But I also think that it's like many of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies that maybe I need to see it a second time to process it a little bit more. I will also say that although certainly the characters, like Alana in particular, is immediate right away from the beginning of saying, like, I'm 25, you're 15. No. but at the same time, it's like the movie does kind of flirt with that. And I could imagine some people having complicated feelings for it for that reason. Um, but I think it's pretty well handled. I think it's an interesting pair of characters. Um, the idea that we have this, young woman who is kind of found herself stuck at home living with her family and all her sisters, still working like a menial job that she doesn't care about, not really sure what she's doing, and then kind of just becoming fascinated by this kid who is immature still, but seems like he is just got pedal to the metal going in whatever direction he happens to be pointing the steering wheel at today, and is just kind of fascinated by the energy of that. And it's interesting. I think it's pretty good.
Okay.
Um, and then we're going to talk about Power of the Dog, which
Yes.
I've already discussed a little bit, but we'll get into that in more detail. But the last of the Best Picture nominees is West Side Story, which, of course, I mean, I think everyone kind of knows what that one is, at least. It's a remake of a Hollywood musical from the '60s, I think. Um, and it tells the story of it is sort of it's a take on Romeo and Juliet, although it takes some plot liberties. It's not a one for one plot. And in fact, this remake is not even a one for one for the original. It makes some structural story changes that I think are actually pretty interesting. But primarily, it's about conflict between a gang of Puerto Rican people and a gang of, I guess they're just American people, like local American people, but specifically, uh, people who are in the lower income and are not doing well in New York either, and the conflict between those two gangs. And of course, we have Tony from one side, Maria from the other side. They fall in love. It's the Romeo and Juliet thing. What I'll say about the remake, directed by Steven Spielberg, is like it's as technically capable as you would guess from Steven Spielberg, right? Like, I mean, when was the last time he made a movie that didn't just function on every level, right? He knows how to make solid, movies that do what they're going to do. Um, I think it kind of I have trouble with remakes a lot of the time. I've talked about this with the live action remakes of Disney animated movies where it's clear that there's a lot of talent involved, but at every scene that I'm watching the new one, I feel like I wish I was watching the old one. This at least didn't feel like that, right? Like I was interested to see this movie's version of each thing as opposed to necessarily just feeling like, why does this even exist? Why are we remaking the original? And it having everything feel comparatively a lot more grounded and less stagey than the original at least feels different enough to feel like it maybe justifies the existence of this version. Um,
Perfect.
but what I will say is that it does occasionally, part of the reason that there's a lot of staginess in Hollywood musicals is because when everything feels really grounded, it seems stranger when people are singing full volume right at each other in each other's faces, like they would not do in real life, right? So it's one thing like when it's stagey that there's sort of a heightened emotive reality about it, whereas when everything's more grounded, the singing feels stranger. Um, I think that it does some really interesting things, structurally with the story. It actually reorders some of the songs and even gives some of the songs to different people. I think that's mostly successful, but not 100% successful. I think some of the stuff is really interesting, but also there's a couple of places where it gives some really bizarre like tone shift that I'm not sure works completely. And so, without necessarily going into a longer spoiler discussion, I will say that I think it is an interesting remake, well made, well put together. Whether or not you think the original needed to be remade or not. I could see that going either way. But if you haven't seen the original, this is a fine one to watch, and it kind of just comes down on to how much you like the story and Songs of West Side Story, because those are the same for the most part.
Perfect. So as we wrap up, just to kind of go into what I was talking about earlier. So you gave a
Mm-hmm.
great brief synopsis so people can try to pick out what they might like or not like.
Mm-hmm.
I plan to see West Side Story and King Richard for sure. If I was only going to see two other ones on here,
Mm-hmm.
what would be your recommendations and why?
Coda, because it's kind of just my own like personal favorite out of all of those. I think it's just very sweet and well told and interesting. And I think there's some buzz too that might be. I feel like the buzz that I've heard, which is I don't know, who knows if it means anything, seems to be between The Power of the Dog and Coda, which seems a little strange to me. We'll talk about The Power of the Dog, which I really like, but I will be very surprised if it wins Best Picture, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment. But
Yep.
Coda, I feel, is like it's another one where I feel like it's a little more out there than say King Richard, but it's also like it's a feel good family drama, and it's got some great music in it. It's good. So that would probably be the next one that I would recommend. Um, and then I guess it depends because like Drive My Car is the one where I sort of feel like that's one that probably fewer people will ever see if they don't watch it for this reason, right? If you don't watch it now because it's nominated for all of these things, like when is it likely to ever come up again? So, but I also, I'm a Paul Thomas Anderson fan, so I was always going to see Licorice Pizza, for example. So,
No, I think that's helpful. So
okay, great. So I think I'm just trying to remember if there was another one. We didn't get into the.
there might have been some other ones that we saw together, but they would be quick discussions like
Yeah,
No Time
well,
to Die and
yeah. So do we want to? Let's since I think it'll take probably more time than any of the others.
agree.
Let's start with Power of the Dog, just because I think that one's sort of the most meaningful to talk about. It's nominated for the most things.
Yep.
Okay, so like I had already given my sort of description of it, which is that like the end result is something I like a lot, but for most of the runtime, the movie has a very unusual way of sort of constantly building tension that it really never releases until the very end, which makes for kind of an uncomfortable watch, even though I found the catharsis to be worth it at the end. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think just to really drive home that point. So I was watching that movie one night when my wife was out with friends, and she came in and she's like, "Oh, what are you watching?" I'm like, "Oh, it's one of the Oscar movies, one I just didn't think that you would be into based on what I'd heard. It's called The Power of the Dog." She goes, "What's it about?" And I was like, "This ranch,"
Yeah.
like halfway through the movie, it's like really hard to describe what
Yeah,
is the movie
I
about.
mean,
Yes, I could have gotten further, but like
right.
on an impulse, like, what are you watching and what's it about? Like, it
Mm,
was hard to say.
yeah. I mean, I think like the log line more or less, I would say, is that there's a ranch owned by two brothers, but one of these brothers is difficult. Is an extremely hard person to be around for a variety of reasons, and the movie is mostly about everyone else in his vicinity trying to figure out what to do about him.
Yeah. And that makes a ton of sense. That's really hard to pull off the tip of your
Oh
tongue
yeah,
when your
yeah,
wife
no,
is
sure.
just
Well,
like,
and you're halfway
"What's
through the
this
movie, you
about?"
don't know how it resolves or anything, right? It's
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah, because part of me was like, it's about these guys that live on a ranch, and like the one guy sucks,
Mm,
and this other guy married this girl that he only barely knew, and this guy kind of bullies everybody, and there's this kid that is
mm-hmm,
sort of because this was too early, even before like the march to the end, right?
mm-hmm,
Like it was just like I'm not 100% sure, She's like, why are you watching it? And I'm like, I mean,
Mhm.
it's interesting. I just don't know where it's going. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think it's primarily so. Like, I think we'll go ahead and give people the spoiler mark here, and as I did in the last update, I will edit in a time code for when we move on to another movie. But so spoilers for Power of the Dog from here on. I think ultimately the movie turns out to be kind of a character study of Phil and Peter, right? Like the two of them is kind of ultimately what it's about, because we have Phil, the character played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who, as kind of previously mentioned, in a lot of ways, kind of a monster, right? Like he is a bully in the extreme, but not the way that we normally think of bullies. He's not the one that's gonna like punch you in the stomach and then laugh with his friends. It's more like he will study you carefully and decide based on enormous insight what's the exact most hurtful thing that he can say to you at the exact most hurtful time, and then he'll do that.
Yeah. So I think that's a great point because a lot of what I've heard about what the praise for this movie is, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
100% disagree with it, but I think there are some caveats that you actually just brought up. Is that one of the highlights of it is that Benedict Cumberbatch plays so far against type,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's interesting to people. But I don't know that he actually does because he's playing such an intelligent guy. Like
Mm-hmm.
he it's a shift of
Yeah.
type, right? Because he's the villain as opposed to the hero, but he's incredibly insightful, incredibly knowledgeable. And there's a weird like little throwaway line about like how he went to like Yale or something.
Right,
Right?
yeah, which like certainly comes as a surprise when that's revealed in the movie. We're like, wait, what? What?
But it makes sense
Yeah.
as to why
Mm-hmm.
he's able to do this.
Yeah.
He's such a smart guy. He's just has this determination, which again is part of the reveal at the end of like
Right.
his own internal turmoils and how what he's trying to wrestle with.
Mm-hmm.
But that I don't know that that's 100% against type, right? Like
Well, yeah, I would agree. I would certainly say I think it's a very good performance, but I would tend to agree that I feel like saying that he's playing against type and that's what makes it good is not how I would put it.
right.
I think what's interesting about the character is that at the same time that he is doing these things that we just talked about, like how incredibly hurtful and vindictive he can be, he simultaneously conveys to us how that's coming from a place of pain and insecurity and fear, right? Because why does he start targeting Kirsten Dunst's character? Because she's coming in to marry his brother, who is like he's mean to his brother too, but is the only person that he sort of vaguely tolerates. And the idea that like, oh wait, he's going to come in and replace me with you, I don't think so, right? And that's when he starts targeting her. And like I was talking with someone where they were trying to understand like why was her like why did she spiral so much? And I was like, because it's a testament to um, the powers of this character that he is able when he targets someone to basically psychologically destroy them, and he does so in slow motion at a pace of his choosing. You know, so there's the things like, she can play the piano a little bit, and her husband, the character, the brother played by Jesse Plemons, is excited by that. Like, she doesn't have to be great. He thinks it's neat that she can play at all. He says, I would love to use the money that I have to make a piano available to you so you can play it however you want, whenever you want, and isn't that great? And she's kind of excited, but she's a little nervous because she doesn't want to lead him on that she is better than she is. But then Phil comes in, Benedict Cumberbatch's character, and basically, like, as she is practicing and trying to get a little better so that she can kind of play a song for when the parents visit, he just comes in with what is it, his fiddle or something, right? What, that he plays or
Banjo. I think he's
banjo,
got a banjo.
right? And so he's really good at playing the banjo, and so he basically just starts playing the same song on his banjo perfectly while she's stumbling over it on the piano, and just like starting and stopping when she does, and basically just proving like, you think you can play the piano? You don't. You can't. You suck. I'm good. And all he does is accompany her on the banjo without even talking to her. But he's just like he is, consistently trying to, destroy her. But there's moments where we can see when she is getting along with his brother, and he's like by himself in his room, the room that he used to share with his brother. You can see the moments of him like almost panicked of like, what am I going to do? She's taking my brother away. Like, he doesn't say it, but he doesn't have to. Like, that's where what's great about Benedict Cumberbatch's performance comes in, is that he can play this vindictive side, but also show us that it's coming from this wounded animal inside him.
Yes. And when we get to sort of the ending and the meaning, like, I actually feel like what happened to Kirsten Dunst like layers in to how at least I interpret the meaning, which I'm not trying to argue is how everybody should, So
yeah, I think there's some layers to what's meant, like by the title, for example, which is part of a Bible verse.
Which it's a Bible verse that's somewhat confusing. So that I think there are not confusing. There are a couple of ways to interpret it, and
Yeah.
I think that leads to some of the confusion. And like I said, like so, I'll just without diving into all of it, like the way that I interpret that Bible verse is that because it comes from it's in John, I think, and it's
Well, here I was going to say it was one of the Psalms, but I can look it up.
Thought it was.
Well,
John.
go ahead. I'll look it up.
Oh, Psalm. Yeah, it's Psalms chapter 22. And it's deliver my soul from the sword, my darling, from the power of the dog. But it's describing the time when Jesus is on the cross, right? Mm-hmm. And
well, I mean, if it's Psalms, it wouldn't have been that, right? Because Psalms was Old Testament?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding my interpretation of it. I was pretty sure that's what it was.
Well,
I'm not going to stand and argue for it. Yeah. I took it to mean, well, let's say it's not, but
okay.
My interpretation of it is the reason why Jesus died on the cross in that belief system, which I'm not going to profess whether anybody should or shouldn't subscribe to it, is that the power of the dog is when you're asking to be delivered from the power of the dog, it's being delivered from the internal, like basically your internal sin, like your internal struggling and suffering.
I found the connection, which is to say this is a psalm from David in the Old Testament. However, Jesus apparently mentions part of this psalm from the cross.
Got it. So wasn't completely off base, and it has to do with him being on the cross.
Yeah. So I didn't know that part, but there you go.
Got it. So, well, that's where the interpretation that I have of it is that's what being delivered from the power of the dog is being delivered from your own internal, like the dog is like your own sins that will eat you from inside, right? Like, or your own internal struggles, if you want to take it out of the biblical side of it. Mm-hmm. And so obviously, like the key person is like, obviously Benedict Cumberbatch's character gets beaten because of that. Like, that's how he is, why he is. But I think that's where the layer is that the other characters are also fighting those internal struggles. Mm-hmm. And what he's doing is he's pulling the power of the dog out of them. Yeah. Right. Like Kirsten Dunst had kind of buried that. And he's going in and he's lifting it up and making it eat at her. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes this movie is just like, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. So, so maybe we ought to just briefly describe the events that lead toward the end, just so that like because I could imagine, like, I wasn't confused, and I don't, but I could imagine people being confused what happened, because it leaves several things kind of oblique, and you have to remember like a scene from earlier and how that might connect. But so what happens is we have, Jesse Plemons' character marries Kirsten Dunst. Her son has just gotten ready to go off to college, but there's like he is coming back, I think, after the first year to stay over the summer. And
he's already been bullied once by
yeah,
Benedict Cumberbatch's
right.
character.
And one of the things that I think I can't remember if it's actually officially confirmed, but it's certainly heavily implied that he's gay, Peter.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that is, yeah.
I'm just trying to remember. I don't
Heavily
think
implied.
yeah,
Heavily
right.
implied. Yes.
So I don't think we are meant to be confused on this matter. Just that they
No.
don't. No one says it out loud is the point. So when he talks about I made a friend at college, we know what he means. But in the time
Right.
period,
And when she asks, "Hey, why didn't you bring your friend to stay?" and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not bringing this friend to stay with that guy's at."
right.
Right.
So
Like,
in
yeah.
any case, when Peter comes here, he is continuing to be bullied by Phil, or at least Phil's trying, but Peter seems a little bit more impervious to it than his mother has been, and so what we see is Peter seeing what Phil has been doing to his mom, and there's some complexity there, but at the same time, what he starts to understand as he spends more time around Phil is he starts to intuit the source of the pain that is driving Phil's actions. Namely, that he has a lot of personal trauma associated with the fact that he is almost certainly gay as well, or possibly bi, but certainly had a male lover in his past.
Right, exactly. Or at least had
Yeah.
a male figure that was very powerful to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't ever, it doesn't decide whether that was
Well, right,
consensual or whether that was a use of power, but it almost doesn't matter.
right. Like the point is that it's clear that, like, it's more complex than just this, but that a big part of what's going on with Phil is that he is in such vast denial of that part of himself that he is, like, terrified of letting any of that ever be exposed to anyone, for anyone else to ever see that part of him. And as a result, but at the same time, a feeling that it means that he can never actually be happy, because can't do that, that would be impossible, can't let that happen, and yet that's the only thing that ever made him feel happy or safe. And that tension turns out like that, Peter basically figures that out by virtue of understanding quite a lot of how that mindset might come to form, right? And so he starts getting closer to Phil and spending a lot of time with him, which honestly, at least for a while, is all the more upsetting to his mom, who is terrified, like, now my son is going to spend time with this monster. Who knows what might happen?
Right, because there's this weird like flip when you get to the end of who is actually grooming who.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a whole bit where Phil decides that he's going to make a lasso for Peter out of, like, rawhide. But then it comes to a point where, like, everything has been kind of coming to a head. It's things are not looking great. As we've previously discussed, the tension has been just ratcheting up and up and up and up and never releasing. But the time comes, Peter feels, that something must be done. And what he does is, it had been previously established that some cows in this area will die of anthrax, and you have to be extra careful when you deal with the corpses, because you could get anthrax, right? But it's revealed as part of, his previous, a scene that we previously thought was just because he was studying diseases because he wants to be a doctor, that he has saved some anthrax infected rawhide, which he substitutes for some of the rawhide being used to make this lasso. And so he encourages Phil to use that rawhide in making that lasso, which we don't realize until after the fact. All we know is, I have some, and you might guess. I didn't guess until after, but
So it gives you one tip in when he goes off by himself and he skins a dead cow that's
right.
like being, so right there, like it's reminding you that the cows have anthrax and that hides can come from the anthrax cows.
Yeah.
Like, so that right there, like I didn't remember all of the fact of like his until it kind of clicked. But that was sort of the tip. That was the tipping point. I mean, I got it a little bit before then, because it was like, I started to feel like, and that was my point is, and so anyway, he gives Phil anthrax, Phil dies. That's
right. Yeah. And so that's what happens. But I think what's fascinating in the layers of all of this, and it comes back to what you were just saying about like, what do we mean, save my darling from the power of the dog? I think on the one hand, there is the idea that he's saving his mother from Phil, who is trying to destroy her. And I think that is a real part and a real layer of the story. I mean, the movie opens with Peter talking about how he promised to always take care of his mom. I mean, that's the opening narration of the movie, right? But at the same time, he has grown close enough to understand Phil. And I think in a very real way, when we say, save my darling from the power of the dog, he's putting Phil out of his own misery in much the way that they did to a rabbit together in an earlier scene.
Yes.
There's this understanding of, I have come to understand that you are living with a profound unhappiness within you that I don't think can be healed, and worse, you're dangerous to other people in the meantime. It is for everyone's best, including yours, that I end it. And so the catharsis of that, and what I think, if anyone who's listening to this didn't watch it, I think what I want to convey here is a lot of things happening that we're not sure we understand completely until it's revealed. So there's a moment prior to us learning the truth of this that they've been working together to finish the lasso, using the last of this rawhide. Everything is feeling extremely tense. They've gotten closer and closer and closer to the idea of Phil actually admitting that there was something with Bronco, this role model figure he had. Getting that close, and it feeling like something terrible is going to happen at any moment. And then what we cut to is Kirsten Dunst can't find her son. Phil is sleeping in uncharacteristically and has blood on his hands. And what I'm thinking here is, oh God, what happened? Did he kill Peter? Is that what's... And I was terrified for that. But what happens as this continues to develop and they're starting to say, well, where are we going to look? Where we got to find Peter? Where is he? And we see him acting very disoriented, and we're thinking, is this because he's reacting to this terrible thing he's done? But then he actually collapses and it starts becoming obvious, wait, no, he's sick. And then we're reminded, oh wait, no, he has blood on his hands because he cut his hand really bad the previous day. And then what's revealed relatively shortly thereafter is, of course, the doctor tells us after he's died, I think it was anthrax, and that is where, you know, I had the Kaiser Soze bulletin board moment where it's like, oh my god, that's what happened. And so I found that catharsis like incredible, but also just like the layers of, you know, because Peter is treated in many ways kind of like a Cypher through the movie, right? Like he doesn't emote very much. I think it's a good performance, but we're left to interpret a lot of what he does, right? Because he doesn't just say what he's actually thinking or feeling, because of course that's the whole.
With tip his hand, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I think I really loved thinking about the dual meaning of, you know, in the verse that he's reflecting on, save my darling from the power of the dog. Who's his darling there? Because I think you could, you know, I don't want to even make it sound like it. You could make a case for it being his mom or Phil. I was like, it's both.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really great. But also, the movie, like I described this before, as like most of the way through the movie, I felt in a way that I don't think I have ever noticed feeling before in a movie. I felt like unsafe, like this movie's going to hurt me.
It has a very weird cadence, and so you know, I'll give a quick mention to the soundtrack, and it being, this is the one that I think we talked about. It's Johnny Greenwood, so it's the guitarist from uh, Radiohead. I think he does a phenomenal job, because when you're looking at those cinematography scenes of the open wilderness and that just ominous, like, but it's not like horror movie ominous. It just like sits with you, right? Like underneath. I think that complementing the performances really gives this movie power. And if you don't remember it and go, I mean, it will never be something you'll go listen to the soundtrack and be like, oh yeah, that's the greatest soundtrack. But
Right.
in the moment, like I was definitely feeling that. And it's just like, because again, your head's like trying to process, like, what the hell is this movie about? Like, what's going to happen? And you know, I had a little bit of a different experience, and this isn't meant to sound like,
Oh,
again,
sure.
we've talked
Yeah.
about this here
Yeah.
before. Like, so I'm watching it and I'm like, and I see them staring off, and you start to see him befriend Peter and all this, and it's like, oh, is this going to end with like a rape or a killing? Like, what? This is going to be terrible. And then it keeps going, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, the movie is giving us way too many clues about like what he's doing,
Mm.
but the kid is not reacting.
Yeah.
And like he's a smart kid. Like he definitely knows what's happening here. So
Right. Yeah.
this isn't where it's going, right? Like he's not grooming this kid. This kid knows what's happening. And I was like, I had this time, I'm like, oh, he's gonna kill that mofo. And I didn't know how yet. Like I was just like, that I bet that's what's gonna happen. He's luring him in and he's gonna kill him. And then when he goes and skins the anthrax cattle, I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So even knowing all of that though, still at the end, and this is again going back to the multiple meanings and the depth of the meaning of the movie, of being saved by the power of the dog, is like the only way that, I can't remember Benedict Cumberbatch's actual character's name. Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only way Phil was ever going to be saved was to admit who he was to somebody he trusted. That's the only way he could have salvation.
Yeah.
And he was right on the cusp of it. And that's when he killed him. And it was like, but you understood why. But it's like Phil is almost in there with the being saved, not that Peter was trying to save him,
Well,
but that he was on his path. That was his path to salvation. If you take it that way, you can look at it that way. You
Yeah.
could look at it as, no, he was just going to do something terrible to this kid.
Hmm.
But you could also look at it as this was his opening to be who he was and to understand and to admit what he did and what he felt and to take another person and to actually open up his life. And it was taken from him because of all the other bad things he'd done. And you don't regret that it was taken from him. So I thought that, to me, that was another layer on the movie.
That's interesting. Like my hesitation when you're describing that is, I'm not that far off from where you are, but I kind of felt a little bit like I'm not as convinced that he could have been brought all the way there, right?
Right.
Like I kind of felt like that last conversation where he got so close but then didn't was kind of like, for Peter, is kind of like the final test.
That's a great point. Like that's almost taking my point and then adding a little piece in the movie that's saying, no, don't. He wasn't. He was that close, but he never chose that salvation. Like he never chose. He chose when he came right to the cusp of it. He could not accept it, and that is why he has been punished. You know, again, I'm not trying to be super biblical.
Oh no, yeah.
The title of the movie is a biblical.
Right. Yeah. No, I absolutely, and I think it definitely frames Peter in an interesting light, because it is a question of, like, once he has come to understand kind of what Phil's going through, we do imagine that it's possible that eventually, given enough time and patience and compassion, maybe he could eventually have come to a place where he's at peace with that. But the problem that Peter has is his mom doesn't have that much time.
Right. And that he's pulling those same insecurities and things like that. Phil is pulling those out of his mom into a point where she is being destroyed.
Well, and for that, by that same token, we could ask if some of that is part of what is happening with Peter too, right? Like the fact that he would even consider this option as opposed to trying anything else, right? Like maybe that's a bit of that influence too, right? I think that overall, looking at the whole story, you know, like this pair of Peter and Phil is just like, they're fascinating characters to me, both of them.
And the whole thing is fascinating to me because when I'm watching it, like I said, the headspace you go through of, oh, this is Phil, like, because you read, like, it's not unclear why Phil starts befriending it. Like that's made very clear in the movie. That whatever his end result is going to be, like, is not clear, but it you can tell because it happens when all of his friends start calling him queer, right? That's when he pulls him close and says, like, hey, don't listen to them. Let's go build this lasso or whatever. I mean, that's sort of the abridged version.
I think it. Well, I think that. Phil, despite his great level of insight when it comes to others, I'm not sure how self-aware he was of that in terms of like having it be like premeditated. But
but as the viewer, you understand,
right? No,
like,
yeah. So, but I think that the turning point though is like, certainly there's a bit of an inflection point with that scene where, you know, Peter's walking through the camp and everyone else is making fun of him. But there's also the bit where Peter finds the little cache of memorabilia and basically, you know, 1920s version of porn mags.
Yeah, trigger point, like,
and so discovers that must have been, you know, Phil's little hideaway. And then when he comes out of there and sees Phil skinny dipping nearby, and Phil understands, like, wait. Where he is, he must have found the spot. So there's an element of like, well, he knows. Right.
And then Peter plays it too very well by just lingering there just long enough that, like, oh no, he wasn't like, oh man, I'm sorry.
Right.
He just kind of hangs there, but he doesn't say, like, he doesn't give like this, oh, I'm watching you skinny dip. It's just
Mm-hmm.
sort of this weird blank.
Well, yeah, like Peter's such an interesting character in that way. It's kind of like I was saying before. Like he he's by the end we learn he is very much not a cipher, but he kind of acts like one, right? Like he keeps all of that stuff internal at the same time that it becomes clear that he's actually pretty in touch with his own thoughts and feelings. And he understands that he is not the typical kid, and he's at peace with that. And he's just living his life, and he doesn't make a big show of everything. Whereas he can see how the violence from Phil, both physical and emotional, is coming from a place of deep insecurity and confusion.
Right. Which is then confirmed by him finding the magazine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that this movie is really good, but like I was saying earlier with with King Richard, I feel like the Power of the Dog is just a little bit too weird and heavy for I think a lot of viewers. And maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. But that's kind of my take. Is that I can imagine a lot of people who just nope out of this movie, half an hour in or something.
I would agree because, like I said, it was maybe 45 minutes in when I had to describe what the movie was about, and
Mm-hmm.
I could not effectively do it.
Right.
And here I am at the end, like with all these profound like thoughts of it, and like really having a deep reflection on it. And 45 minutes in, I could not answer the question what this movie is
Yeah.
about.
So let's do just a quick rundown of what it's nominated for. Best Picture, of course. Best Director for Jane Campion, who's actually already won a Best Directing Oscar before, right? Was it just nominated before for The Piano?
She's been nominated for the piano. I
Nominated.
can't remember if she won or if just Anna
No,
Paquin
I
won.
think you're right. I think it was she's been nominated before for Best Director. I actually haven't seen The Piano. I maybe should.
Yeah, it's also complicated, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I believe it. I mostly know it as a movie that supposedly you get to see Harvey Keitel nude. So
Which was a bigger deal at the time than it is
yeah,
now. Like
yeah,
there are other movies now. I mean,
right.
shit, there's Hulu series where you
Well, it was a
they
big enough deal that that's the only thing I know about the movie. So,
it's yeah.
in any case, we also have Best
But,
Actor.
but
Oh,
speaking of Jane Campion, I
oh,
mean,
go
I think
ahead.
we should
Yeah.
cover the fact like some of the back and forth that's been going on in the media with her.
Oh, yeah.
So Sam Elliott came out and said this movie was I'm not saying his exact words.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing what I remember, that this was basically an abomination of westerns, and it made all cowboys look like they were gay, and how does somebody from New Zealand think that she could possibly capture the American West?
Yeah. Pretty disappointing from Sam Elliott, honestly.
Yes. Not disappointing from Jane Campion. She was asked for a response to that, and she said, well, my first understanding is that Sam Elliott is not a cowboy. He's just an actor. So I'm not exactly sure why his views are more important than anybody else's on this.
Mm-hmm.
And the American West is a mythic space that has a lot of room for a lot of different movies,
Mm-hmm.
and mine fits in there.
Yeah.
And hey, by the way, some of the most praised westerns were made in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure how New Zealand is getting a bad rap here. Boom, like almost
Yeah.
like she didn't mic drop. She said it very smoothly.
Yeah.
It wasn't a quick hit. It wasn't a dunk. Like it was just
right. It's
very matter of fact.
honestly it's a more thoughtful response, honestly, than his comments really even deserve. Because
correct.
yeah.
And I think that's what made it so good. And I saw one movie critic say, well, Jane Campion's not going to be able to accept any Oscar awards because she's going to be in prison for murder. As in she just like fucking
Yeah.
freaking killed him,
Yeah.
Because
So-
to your point, it was so much more thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. It was disappointing from him.
Yeah.
It's okay. Is this the normal Western trope? No, but that's not the movie.
Right. I
want to
mean,
watch that? Go watch
Sam Elliott
Yellowstone.
is allowed to not
Yeah.
like the movie if he doesn't like the movie, right? Like, there's nothing about that. But yeah, some of what he said is really kind of was a little bit over the line, even for normal Hollywood etiquette.
Yes. You want to watch old westerns? There's plenty of old westerns. You want to watch modern westerns? Yeah, go watch Yellowstone. You want to see that kind of stuff? That stuff exists. That's
Mm,
in the metaverse.
yeah. Frankly,
You
there's a
know,
lot more of that already. Like
right?
these stand out because they're the exception. Anyway, because there's this one and Brokeback Mountain 20 years ago or however long that was.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, so carry on with her
yeah.
their
So
nomination. Yeah.
yeah. So Jane Campion for Best Director. We also have Benedict Cumberbatch for The Power of the Dog. Best Actor rather. So I mean, he might win it for all I care. I mean, I think he's got some good competition, but I think he's up there. I wouldn't be upset if he won, even though I also really really liked Andrew Garfield in Tick Tick Boom, and I would that movie is not getting a lot of other awards. And then Will Smith is I was just talking about his movie star power, so but yeah. Then we also have for Best Supporting Actor, we have both Jesse Plemons, who plays Phil's brother, and Cody Smith McPhee, who plays Peter, both nominated against each other. So, like, I mean, I guess it's happy to have them both get nominations, but it's sad because sometimes that means that they will split the vote, right? But also the fact that I'll just go ahead and say that Troy Kotsur for Coda is in that category too, and I'd like to see him win, honestly.
Good. Yeah. If you're picking between the two Power of the Dog people, I would say Cody Smith McPhee. I mean,
Yeah, I agree. I like Jesse Plemons a lot, but I think
I do.
Jody, yeah.
Yeah. But just the blankness that he carries, like to your point earlier, like where you realize he's not blank.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the whole discussion of the idea that vanilla is actually a fairly complex flavor, and yet we sometimes treat it like it's just default.
Yep.
The idea that like he seems blank, like there's a blank page, but what we realize is that it's just actually not demonstrative. There's a lot going on inside. But we also have Kirsten Dunst for Best Supporting Actress. I thought she was really good in this too. We didn't really talk too much about her character except in the terms of her being kind of a victim of Phil. But at the same time, I think
that's the role, right? That's the role in this movie.
Yeah, but I think what I was just going to say is that key to understanding what's happening is how capable and competent she seems running a restaurant all on her own, compared to how quickly she starts to crumble under Phil's onslaught, right? Like,
yep.
But so let's see. We've also got Jane Campion for Best Adapted Screenplay because it's based on a novel. We have Johnny Greenwood for Best Original Score.
I feel very strongly that this is a top contender in my mind. Mm-hmm. So, of the movies I've seen, I'm putting this as my pick.
Okay. Yeah, I've
seen almost all of them. Shit.
Yeah. Well, both of us. Yeah, we've seen 4 out of 5. So I think I would probably pull up on like YouTube or something a little bit of the music just to kind of remind myself what we're talking about. But because I think several of the scores in this year are like Encanto and Don't Look Up are a little bit more music forward. Like Encanto, even separate from the songs themselves, but just the music is very, like it's big, right? And then Don't Look Up, which we talked at length about its faults, but I don't think the music is making a choice and delivering on it. I'm not sure I love that choice, but it's not the music's fault, I don't think. Anyway. Yeah. Let's keep going. We also have Best Production Design. And Best Cinematography. On that note, quick question for you. Did you see the shape of the snarling dog in the shadows on the hills? Because I couldn't see it.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't go back to look at it or anything, but in the shots where the camera was focusing on it, I didn't see it.
So that was to me the most confusing part about like figuring out the end of the movie, right? Like, not that I was trying to like figure it out, but you know, the whole point of, and that was where I first like came to the conclusion that this guy is going to either rape or kill this kid
Hmm.
because they're looking out into that. You can see the dog, and my thought process is, oh, he's going to take him out there for whatever reason, and that's where it's going to happen.
Hmm.
And somehow that's where the power of the dog is that this atrocious event occurred in that dog shadow. So yeah, I yeah, definitely could see it.
Okay, well,
So
I was just curious.
it
I mean,
actually impacted my viewing of the movie.
I mean, because like they tell us in the dialogue, like even if you can't see it, like I couldn't, like they tell us what they're seeing, and so like it doesn't matter that much. But
Yeah, if you go back and look at it, I mean, I'll be very quick. Like
yeah,
there's a mountain range, there's a valley, and that's where the shadows are. And the shadows that come out of the mountain range look like a dog.
I think I was probably looking at the positive space rather than the negative space. If you follow me, like I was
Yeah,
looking at the hills, not the shadow.
yeah, you'd
Anyway,
have to. It's all the shadow.
right.
So anyway,
Well, that's kind of interesting, though. I might look up a still of it or something just to see. But so we had, yeah, best production design and best cinematography and best sound and best editing, I believe. Yep, there it is. So that was the number one nominee getter for 12 nominations, and so that's pretty good. And so I predict that it will win a significant number of those, even if it doesn't win Best Picture.
yeah, because all those are fair. I mean, it's
Hmm.
a all those nominations have to do with the crafting of the movie, and it's a very well crafted movie.
Hmm.
Its message is a little heavy. It's
Well,
you,
there's got some
you don't have
ambiguity and nuance to it too, right?
there's
Like,
some yeah, there's some ambiguity and nuance. There's some, even if you don't take to the actual biblical interpretation, like there is a little bit of that you kind of have to have to pull all the meaning out of the movie. I feel
hmm,
like, at least that's my personal feeling. You know, if you're trying to interpret a biblical verse and how it
hmm,
makes sense in the movie, like you have to have some lean into the biblical verse,
hmm.
right? You know,
It does help for
so
sure.
it does help. So I think that hurts it a little bit in that it's, you know, while you and I can take the time to like dissect what is that verse supposed to mean,
Hmm.
if you're not already have that inclination and you don't want to take that time, like then some of the meaning is just lost on you, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's a couple things working against it from like the full impact, but
Hmm.
as far as a well-crafted movie, like yes, it
Yeah.
should have all of those.
I
So
think, yeah, I think so much of my overall feeling on it comes from feeling like they stuck the landing. Like it was a really bumpy ride, like deliberately, but like a tense, not always pleasant ride. But then the payoff is worth it when it comes in. But for someone who, for example, maybe missed a detail here or there and then didn't understand what was happening at the end, for example, like I could imagine this movie just failing completely for that person if they don't get what it is that Peter did, right?
yes, and why?
Right.
Which isn't, you know,
Well,
it's clear to us because, but everything is subtext, right? Like
yeah.
there's no indication that, like there's never ever an overt implication that either of them has ever
Well,
engaged in
like
anything
even if you
homosexual.
just
Like
got up
it
and
just doesn't exist,
yeah.
right?
Well, like even if you just forgot that there was that scene where he went and skinned the anthrax cow. Like imagine not knowing that detail and trying to figure out what happened at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that is the power of the dog. I think it probably won't take as long as all of that, but Do we want to touch on some of the other movies we've seen? The we've got Luca and Raya in the what's the um, Raya and the Last Dragon, and then there's also No Time to Die.
I got time to do one more.
All right, let's talk about No Time to Die.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I thought you were going to go with Luca.
Well, no, we could talk about
No
Luca, but
Time to Die.
I saw No Time to Die more recently. I remember it more.
That's fine.
All right. So I have been kind of mixed on the Craig Bond movies generally. Like, I think Casino Royale is real good. I think Skyfall is real good. I wasn't as big a fan of some of the others. I thought this one had some real good parts and some parts that just didn't really work for me at all. So I don't know. What did you think?
I don't think that's an unreasonable description of the movie. It was fun. I like that it picked where it was going
Mm-hmm.
and just went there, even if it was odd.
Mm-hmm.
I like Daniel Craig as Bond. I like how he portrays his Bond.
Mm-hmm.
I like how they've developed his Bond to have more complexities than Bond. Like previous Bond movies, Bond is like he's just the same guy inserted many times.
This is where we should remind people to go check out our Mission Impossible versus James Bond series earlier on the feed, where we talked a lot about the various portrayals of James Bond over the years.
Yeah. So the quick summary is that Daniel Craig's Bond progresses in character, like deliberately in the movies, more than any other Bond, and that I still like that. And I like that that existed in this movie, but it does make it a little different. And the end game that they were going for is a little different than anything you would expect from a Bond movie. So from the Bond movie formula, this thing starts in the mold and then kicks the mold the F open.
Yeah,
Right.
like I think to use kind of a meme phrasing, it could be argued that this movie didn't understand the assignment. In the sense that of for a lot of people, what they want from a Bond movie is the more formulaic standalone stuff, and they're not necessarily as excited by or as interested in a more serialized series of movies that develops and then chooses to have a definitive finish. Like that's some people don't want that to be what James Bond movies are, which is fair, I suppose. I didn't feel super emotionally invested necessarily in that discussion. But yeah, and I think to some extent my feelings about the ending, do we want to just go ahead and give the spoiler flag?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So I didn't necessarily hate the idea of the ending, but it was deflated just a little bit by how obvious the rest of the movie was contrived to produce that outcome. Right? There's a lot of things that are true in this movie only so that we can contrive the perfect solution that James Bond gets to save everybody else but die.
That was sort of my more helpful explanation of the movie committed to what it was going to do and then just stuck to it.
Yeah.
When
And
you
so
look back in hindsight, like they decided this is how we're ending it. Let's get there.
Yeah.
Which,
I mean,
it's
yeah,
not the
like
best picture, but it's fine.
sure. Yeah, and I didn't hate that about it. I'll say that I like Rami Malek as an actor quite a bit, but boy, his character just did nothing for me in this movie. I don't know what happened there. He's just
honestly,
a big blank.
I believe my personal feeling is because of how good he is in other movies and how vanilla, although vanilla is complicated, how
Bland.
how uninteresting he was in this movie made it more dramatic. If you know, like I feel like, and again, I come from a place like you do, where I know Remy Malik and I know his work, but I almost feel like if you didn't know him, it wouldn't be as upsetting as it is for you and I,
Hmm.
because we're familiar with how good he can be and how little they gave him.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it. It's not just a waste of Rami Malek as an actor. It's also just like one of the things that's like a defining trait of the James Bond franchise is interesting villains. It's like like there's five things in James Bond movies, and interesting, weird, over the top villains is like one of those things. And
Well, and then you take even another step, and like let's go with like a even older franchise that was successful.
mhm,
Like he's essentially they've taken the Moriarty role
mhm.
and almost moved it to him in a way,
But there's no
as opposed to
support for
being
it though.
on
Blofeld,
Blofeld.
yeah,
Like that's where it lived, and that's where it kind of like made sense. But the way they made the movie, it pulled that role onto Remy Malik,
hmm,
which then left like sort of that disconnect of like, well, I thought this was there was.
yeah. Well, like the thing is, like I had problems with Spectre as a film. I think that there were a lot of things in that movie that just didn't work for me at all. But shoot, what's the actor's name? I'm blanking on it. But the guy who's playing Blofeld, I thought he's great. I thought the
Yeah, he's the one from
performance.
Inglorious Bastards, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and I'm blanking on the name, but yes, that's the guy, and he like his performance is good. Like I buy him as this megalomaniacal supervillain. Like where I had problems in Spectre was, for example, putting James Bond in a torture device and saying, "I'm going to zap your brain with lasers," and doing it even once might leave you paralyzed. And now I'm going to proceed to do it 5 times, but you're fine. The end of this little thing. Now you blow up my face. And it's like, what? What? What was the point of any of that? Like, he actually did. He pressed the button and did the thing, but Bond is just fine. What is this? That
Christopher Walken, by the way.
oh
Um,
yeah,
sorry to just.
yes. So but yes, in any case, I thought he was good, and like he's good in this bit too. Even though like the role he's given is to be the guy who gets killed, so that I guess the real villain Rami Malek can show up. Except Malek like didn't feel like anything, right? Like I mean, even in the scenes where he's in, like he gets to have like a little speech about like he likes poisonous things or something. Like what is there to his character? There's just nothing to grab onto. It's frustrating. It really hurts the movie, and I don't know if that's his fault or if someone directed him like that or if it's the script or it's just a combination of all of the above, but boy.
I feel like it's just honestly, I feel like it's the script and like the ethos, right? Like the whole point that we were getting to with Spectre, that we forgave all its faults,
Mhm.
is that we were building back to Blofeld and like
Mhm.
the old school 70s villain, and that was gonna be the
Mhm.
end of Bond. Like again, I have to keep drawing the connection to Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes.
Mhm.
Like it was like his foil, and like that was going to be the end. Was the two of them both dying together? Like that's what
Mhm.
it felt like. What was going to happen? And then it was like, oh no, we're going to get rid of him, and this guy's going to come in, and then like you're going to die, and now you have a kid. Uh, and it just that's a script problem to me.
Yeah.
That's not a Rami Malek problem, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well, right, because like his motivations don't make any sense because the motivations are reverse engineered to produce the situation they wanted at the end.
it honestly made me respect Daniel Craig even more, because I wanted to believe these things were awesome that were happening. Not awesome,
Mhm.
but like that. Like he sat there, he delivered it, for anybody who could have delivered a James Bond is dying performance. I
Mhm.
loved his,
Yeah.
and I loved everything about where they got to, like with him having a a person he actually loved and a child that he
Mhm.
was in and that he
Yeah.
was
I mean,
concerned about, right? Like he wasn't just like, you know, two middle fingers in the wind, I'm dying. Like he
mhm.
actually cared about dying at
Yeah.
the point that we get to.
Right.
Daniel Craig gave us all of that. But you're right. It doesn't, the
I
rest of it is just kind of like,
Yeah, like the moment itself, I think the problem is not that moment. The moment that they wanted to have. Like the problem is not that moment. The problem I think is that their attempt to construct the sequence of events that leads to that moment was done poorly. That's the failing, not the fact that they were trying to lead to that ending, because lots of movies do that, is that they know what the ending is and they have to write the story that gets there. But the problem is there's just too many pieces of this that feel like the only reason it's happening like this is to make sure that, well, why wouldn't James Bond just do this? Well, he can't do this because of this. Well, why wouldn't he do that? Well, he can't do that because this. And it just feels like, let's just carefully in advance tape up all the doors and brick up the windows and make sure that he has no way out. And
yeah.
it
But
feels
I will say
contrived.
they're somewhat a victim of the entire like system because they're building to an end that was never possible, right?
Mm,
Like every other James Bond movie is like, oh, here's all the reasons why he's gonna die, and then
mm-hmm.
he gets out. And
Yeah,
so you almost have to be like that meticulous. And
yeah.
so it was I give him a little credit for like it was an unwinning scenario,
Well, and
right?
here's the thing too, though, that they still kind of pull the punch because we don't see a body, do we? We see a building blow up.
Yeah. I
There
feel like
are previous James Bond movies that could have had everything we saw in this one. Cut to James Bond on his like a
jet
speedo
ski.
or jet ski.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I got out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it was like, how did he get out? Well, he's James Bond. James Bond gets out. But they had to build in the things of like, well, even if you somehow escaped it, you can't touch anybody you love because you'll kill them with nanite poison that's in you forever, no matter what. We have to make it very clear there's no cure ever, ever. Don't even think about it. Let's not even explore it anymore because we're just so sure that there's nothing to be done.
Yeah.
That's some of the stuff that really bothered me, is that stuff that just didn't feel like there was any story reason for it except to just make absolutely sure that there was no other thing that James Bond could do at the end. And it's like, I don't blame them for trying that, but it does, some of it didn't work very well for me. But at the same time, I agree with you. Given everything that had led to it, I think that final scene is pretty good. I like Daniel Craig in it. I didn't hate the kid, honestly.
No.
But yeah, at the same time, some of that artifice being a little too apparent early on, and just the very strange charisma black hole generated by the villain in this movie. I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand how they whiff that hard in a big production like this.
Yeah, it's definitely I 100% agree with you. It's not as engaging as the other movies. So,
Yeah. And yeah, I think, I don't know, maybe some of it, I don't know, because I had a problem with this Inspector, and I don't think you did as much, but I think that it's one thing to say James Bond can be super cheesy, like all the Roger Moore ones, or it can be really grounded, and there's room for both, but the two don't go super well together in the same movie. And that's what I feel like went wrong with Spectre for me. Um,
yeah.
and I wonder if some of the issues here were them still trying to make that work. Just because, again, like the villain's plan in this one, like what was it even that he wanted to just kill everybody for reasons? Like what was his motivation? I don't even remember now.
honestly, I can't remember other than like trying to kill James Bond,
Yeah.
and that wasn't his real motivation. I get it, but that's I. You're right. I wasn't left with anything more
Yeah.
clear.
In any case, though, so like, but there's some good action in it, and certainly if you're a James Bond fan, you should see it just for the completion of it and all. But yeah. So, well, let's see.
And
It
not the
was
completion of the
nominated for
franchise,
three
by the
things,
way.
though, right? So,
It's not the
um,
completion of the James Bond franchise. Let's just be
well,
clear.
right. Well, for Daniel Craig, though.
It's Daniel Craig's, and then they're going to be hopefully more like I don't,
Well,
aware of the fact like that when the new guy comes in, like that James Bond isn't always the same guy, right?
yeah, I guess
If they
so.
did,
Like, well,
they've done only once that
yeah.
I can remember. You
Well,
know,
the other thing though is that there was some weird stuff with the way that they really tap danced around giving this other character, oh, she's briefly 007 because he's retired, and then she's kind of still 007, only not anymore. But wait, what?
I feel like that's a timing issue. Like
Mm,
at least me, I thought maybe they could get to her, and then they
mm.
decided not to.
Yeah,
So they
like
kind of
like
left.
they were maybe kind of trying to float the idea of like, what if she is the next? Huh? Huh? And then a lot of the the people who are you know still listened to when they shouldn't be were like, no, and so they kind of pulled the punch maybe. I don't know, but yeah, that felt a little strange. Like I liked her, but it was weird in the movie, the weird back and forth they did, and the wishy washiness of that.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so No Time to Die is nominated for Best Sound, which sure, fine. Um,
James Bond died really loudly.
it's a big boom. I heard it. And then let's see what also Best Original Song for No Time to Die is the name of it. What is what's the third one? Am I
It's probably another sound thing or a
miscount? Well,
special effects or something.
oh, on that note, maybe on this last little bit. Oh, it's also for best visual effects, I guess. Which sure. I mean, I think that was one of the things we touched on when we read the nominations, which was like, really? I mean, okay, I guess it's got some stunts stuff. I mean, maybe it's got some things that are more effects than we would realize, and that's why they're good because we didn't know that there were effects or something. But
I mean, James Bond blows up at the end. I feel like that's a
yeah,
special effect.
well, but they
Get
also
it? Didn't show the body. Yeah.
yeah, but it's up against a movie where Spider-Man flies through the mirror dimension and uses geometry to web up Doctor Strange in a bunch of geometric webs while there's fractal trains kaleidoscoping everywhere. Like those are some special effects. Not that there's like I'm not saying that the
Oh
more
wait,
grounded are not wrong. I'm just saying that like it's by comparison the special effects are not flashy. Um, but yeah. So, oh, but the other thing to just note is that apparently there's a whole bunch of the awards that they're not going to announce on the telecast.
I think we
Uh,
talked about that in the opening.
did we? I not
Yeah,
tonight
you had looked
anyway.
it up. Yeah, you had looked it up.
Oh, okay. But in any case, though, I think uh, that seems weird. I mean, I just the idea that I mean, I guess I get it, but it was this weird, apparently, like some power move, but like ABC told them that they had to, or it's like we won't show the Oscars unless you don't show some of these categories, and I don't know. I think it's not a good look for the Oscars, honestly, to just not show. Like, I mean, we already knew there was a bunch of technical awards that don't get shown on the main conference, but winnowing it down further doesn't seem like positive step to me.
We'll see how it turns out.
Yeah.
We'll keep an
I
eye on
mean,
that.
last year's Oscars were already kind of an unusual circumstance, right? Because it was happening right in the middle of the pandemic, of trying to figure out, like, well, okay, how do we even do this? And that sort of thing. But, like, it was kind of understood that this was an anomaly, right? So, but now it feels like this has to be the new version of what's going forward, and we'll see if it's any good or not. But in the meantime, everyone out there, if you're listening, go watch some good movies.
Watch good movies.